What's going on, guys? Race over here at Full Tilt Bike Co. And today we're going to be talking about 5 tips to help you make your bike faster around the track. Let's go. First thing we're going to talk about, tire pressure. That's right. Easiest way to increase a little bit of speed around the track is to make sure you know exactly how much air you're running in your tires. I like my tires in a mid-range. I don't like them super inflated because I had the sidewall blow on me one time. So I run about 65 to 80 PSI depending on the track conditions. If I'm running a harder surface track with soil tack, slurry, asphalt corners, I'm going to be in that upper 80 PSI range. This is going to give me a little bit firmer of a tire. There's going to be less contact when I actually have my weight on top of the bike, and I'm going to have, AKA, less drag when I'm rolling around the track. Now, if it's raining, the track's a little bit wet, or it's sandy conditions, I'm going to want all the grip that I can get. So I'm going to run down to about that 65 PSI range, get the tires a little bit more deflated, get some more grip on the track, and overall get a better riding experience. Tire pressure is easily one of the things that you can adjust that's not going to take a bunch of time, and it's going to really drastically affect the way that the bike rides. Tip number 2, we're going to get into the engine of the bike, the heart and soul, the drivetrain, right? Anything that has most amount of wear points on your bike is going to be something that you want to frequently look at. They could be causing you problems, or AKA making you go a lot faster if everything's tuned up. First thing I'm always going to look at is my chain alignment. Okay, I'm going to look and make sure that everything in the back is still tight from the last time I got my bike serviced. All my chainring bolts are tight, everything is good to go there so that I don't have any displacement inside the chain, right? That's the number one thing, that if your chain is riding on one side or the other of your gear, you could be creating a lot of friction in the drive chain, and essentially it's more resistance. Same thing with the chain tension and also how clean your chain is, okay? If you've got a chain that is full of dirt, it's gunked up, it's not going to be rolling nice and smooth around your front gear and your back cog. So I personally like to make sure I have a wire brush or a toothbrush on hand, and every usually 2 weeks I'm going to go through, I'm going to try and get as much grit and grime out of my chain as I can, and then I'm going to reapply some of my favorite chain waxes, chain loops. First one is going to be the dry formula. Like I said, if you're running a higher tire pressure at a track that's really soil tacked, seal coated, whatever it needs to be, there's not a ton of dust, you're going to run something that's nice and dry so that you're just getting good lubrication on it. It's going to be a little bit stickier, but it's going to make everything flow a lot better. And on the other hand, you're gonna have something that's a wet lube. It's kind of a more set it and forget it. Really an all applications lubricant. If you don't wanna be checking in every 2 weeks, you just wanna run it until it sounds like this thing's about to fall apart. You're gonna wanna use something that's got a little bit more wax in it. It's gonna go on heavier. Personally, I like the Rock and Roll Gold. Apply a thin layer of this to your chain every 3 to 4 weeks. And this is gonna get you through rain, dry, snow, whatever it is. I don't know who's riding out there in the snow, but up here in Minnesota, we like to make sure we're completely covered. So I'm not as fickle with my bike maintenance, so I always use the Rock and Roll Gold. With that being said, anything outside of your chain is going to be more as your cog or your chain ring, right? So I mainly look at the materials the chain rings are made of. Personally, I like to run a 7000 series gear. It's gonna have a little bit more tensile strength for what I'm trying to get out of it. That also, in my mind, is gonna last a little bit longer. Bigger guys over, 13, 14 is gonna wanna make sure you have a stainless cog on there. You can put an aluminum on, but it's probably gonna wear out and create a lot of that resistance that we were talking about earlier. The last thing I'd like to highlight on tip number 2 is gonna be your chain tension, right? I like to go by the saying, loose is fast. The chain tension wants to be somewhere within, I like to say, an 1/8 to 1/4 play evenly around the whole chain. If you're anything looser than that, you might run the risk of it coming off, and that's not very fast. And if you're anything tighter than that, you're not gonna have good amount of free play in your cranks, AKA giving you a little bit more resistance, and that's never fast. That being said, let's make sure we're always checking into our drivetrain. We're keeping up with good maintenance on it. We're applying the right lubricants to our drivetrain so that everything lasts longer and runs smoother. And always check in on your chain tension, because that's a huge thing that affects a lot of speed that can be carried through the drivetrain. On to tip number 3, which is headset tension. We see bikes all the time that have play in it, which means that it's not only bad for the internals, but it could be bad for a lot of the surrounding parts that you find in your whole steering system. When you run your headset a little bit too loose, it could leave room for you to score the cups of your frame, especially if you have a carbon frame, and that could damage the bearings. It's gonna have a lot of extra stress added on centralized points in your bearings rather than evenly around the whole head tube. It could also cause scoring of the frame, which could cause weak points, and it could also run for a little bit stiffer of a ride. One way or another, it's really bad for your steering system if it's loose. Pretty straightforward. Here's how to fix it though. If your steering system's a little bit loose, we want to make sure we loosen both of your pinch bolts, because these pinch bolts on your stem is what holds everything from moving side to side and up and down, right? Once you lock these pinch bolts into place, this thing ain't going nowhere. Then you're going to gently, do not over tighten this, gently tighten the top bolt in your fork until you feel the headset start to tighten up. You want to get it right to where you have plenty of play. It's nice and loose. I like to personally pick the bike up and let the handlebars fall. I run myself a little bit tighter, as you can see, so it's not going to fall as freely. But once that handlebar starts to fall and you know the headset is nice and tight, you've got your headset in the right place. I can also sit this bike down on the ground, grab both ends of the handlebars, move it back and forth, and make sure I feel no play in there. Then once I've got my top cap tightened up, I'm gonna make sure my pinch bolts get tightened back up so that nothing comes loose. And we're gonna move on to having your headset too tight. So if you don't do that accurately and you over tighten the top cap, which everybody loves to do out there because everybody's nice and strong. If you over tighten this and you get everything too tight, it's gonna lead you to not be able to maneuver as easy through the corners. You're not gonna be able to take the lines that you want. And that really is more going to hinder your actual racing portion by having it too tight. It's not necessarily going to damage anything other than wear your bearings out a little bit too fast. But if you have everything too tight, it's just gonna feel weird around the track. You're probably not gonna be super comfortable, and you're gonna wanna get these pinch bolts loosened up, loosen your top cap, retighten everything up, get yourself back going. Tip number 4, check all the bolts on your bike. Run through this whole race rig before you hit the track for practice, racing, whatever it is. I personally like to use one of these guys, a Park Tool HXS-1.2. It's gonna have pretty much every single Allen wrench that you need to go through this whole bike. Go through, make sure all the bolts are tight. That is surely gonna make sure you go faster on race day if your parts aren't falling off your bike. Tip number 5 is gonna be the braking section of your bike. Nothing kills speed like a dragging brake, and we wanna make sure we run through and check the whole system before we hit the track, because it can either provide a lot of confidence having a good set of brakes or bring you great dishonor. Oh, he's using the damn brakes. So pretty much good way to check in on the brake system is gonna be pretty straightforward. Spin the wheel, make sure whether you have V-brakes or disc brakes that you don't have either the pads on your V-brakes dragging or the pads on your disc brake dragging. I can tell by how this wheel is spinning how freely it is, and I can look right down the middle, make sure I see clean air on both sides of my rotor, that I know my brakes aren't dragging and I'm not gonna have any resistance slowing me down around the track. If on my disc brake system, my rotor is touching one side and I don't see air at a certain point in the rotor, I'm gonna use my handy dandy Park Tool DT2 alignment rotor gauge thing. And I'm gonna grab it by either the 90-degree or the 60-degree angle, and I'm gonna push slightly on that rotor to get it where I want it. A lot of times if your rotor gets glazed over from excessive wear, you're most likely going to need to buy a new rotor. This is the most common option that we see, but if you just have a little bit of wobble side to side in a rotor that may be brand new, a lot of times we use that DT2 tool to make sure we've got nice free rolling brakes around the track. For your post mount V-brake style brakes, we're gonna look down the center and we're gonna make sure we see clean air on both sides of it all the way around the rim. We have to make sure our rim gets spun the full rotation because this is a lot bigger than your rotor. As long as we see clean air, you're good to go. You're gonna hit the track with no resistance. If you happen to have your brakes touching in a certain spot on your rim, you wanna make sure we follow up with the tensioning screws on your actual brake arms. You wanna go ahead and tighten that screw in, bring the brake arm to either the right or the left, balance it out until you have clean air all the way around your rim, nothing's dragging, and you're good to hit the track. To pull that tension in to get your brakes to move one side or the other, you simply want to tighten a Phillips head using something like the SD6 screwdriver from Park Tool here. Adjusting that tension on your V-brakes will also allow for you to adjust your actual lever feel and how far you get to pull your lever in before your pads make contact. Having a good setup of brakes and the right proper tension on your brake arms is going to allow you to feel a little bit more confident and be able to actually ride the bike the way that you want to ride it. So moving on from the brakes, that pretty much wraps up the 5 tips that I have for you to make your bike actually go faster on the track. But we want to hear from you. Make sure you drop your favorite speed boosting tip in the comments below. We're going to be taking the best tip and giving away a free t-shirt once this video hits 30 comments. So if you're like me and you want to get faster, make sure you let us know. We'll see you next week. Thanks for tuning in. FullTiltBike.com.